Did you know? Failure forms a path. Let me tell you why I know this. But before we begin, let me ask you this question. Can you think of a lesson that you learned? A lesson that to this day guides you and shapes you and keeps you. A lesson that you learned maybe in the first quarter to third of your life. A lesson that's really important to you today. I'm not going to ask you to share it, but I do want you to call it to your mind. Got it? Okay. For how many of you did you learn that lesson in times of ease and flowery beds of rest? How many of you learned that lesson in times of ease? Wow, no one. So that lesson that still today holds you and guides you and keeps you, you learned in times of challenge, in that crucible moment, maybe even in times of failure. And that becomes important. That lesson that you just thought of, from that moment you learned it, has formed a path. Failure forms a path. I want to introduce you to my parents. Born in 1921 and 1923 in Jim Crow, Mississippi, they understood the path of difficulty and challenge. They understood the difficulty of failure. My father was not able to finish high school. My mother did finish, but at a colored school in Jackson, Mississippi. They grew up in a time when life was difficult for them and the things they wanted. My mother was brilliant, but there was no way for her to achieve what was important to her. And for her whole life, she thought of herself as a failure because she didn't have a piece of paper she could hang on the wall. But that failure formed a path. And it shows up in the lives of her children, and it shows up in a blackboard eraser. I lived my life in a house, and I'm the short one in my family, where an eraser lived atop the refrigerator, out of the reach of children. I have a sister, but very much in the reach of my mom and my dad. And whenever we, mostly me, had broken the rules, abridged the family guidelines, done what was wrong and sinful in the sight of Willa and Wiley, the eraser would come out. And you would be seated at the kitchen table, and you'd have to look my 6'3" mother in the face while she asked you questions. Zina, why did you break into your sister's piggy bank and steal her money? Zina, why did you bring home an F on this paper? Zina, why did you lose the 12th grade election to Diane Harris? Zina, why do you think Edmund left you at the altar 9 weeks before your wedding? All of them true stories. All of them moments in my life that felt like failure. But with the eraser in her hand and her looking me in the eye, she asked me those questions not to bring me back to that place of pain, not to remind me or to rub my nose in what felt like abject failure. Instead, the reason she brought it to my attention was so that there'd be time for tears and for discussion, for grace and for wisdom, and to begin to understand that failure is not the opposite of success, but failure is a part of success. What she was trying to teach me was that in those moments when I felt like I was at the nadir and there was no way up, only out, that place was the moment that began to form the path. This was the moment that I could begin to stop, to review, to redirect, and to refire down a different path because of the failure. She would hand you the eraser. And the thing that we were taught in that moment is that whatever the transgression or whatever had happened to you, you were to erase the event, but remember the lesson. Erase that I'd broken into my younger sister's piggy bank. Remember, you don't steal. Erase the F. But remember that a good grade only comes with good study. Erase the loss of the 12th grade election, which I'm still not quite over. But remember that you are not limited in your leadership by position. You still have voice and you still have power. Remember that because Edmund left you at the altar, you got the man that you were supposed to be married to. Here is how failure forms a path. If when we fail, there's no eraser in your life, there's no understanding that you can erase the event and hold on to the lesson, then you stay down, and failure is only failure if you don't get back up. What my mother wanted me to know was that this was the open door to the path that failure formed. Failure forms a path because it requires that you ask your why. Why am I in this position? Not to waddle in it, not to think that it captures you, but why? What can I learn from what has happened? If nothing's lost in the divine economy of God, what do I learn in this moment? Because that learning is going to strengthen me. She taught me about the path because the first thing to ask was the why. And she taught me about the path because the second thing to ask was the how. How was what I had done myself a part of the failure? Or how were the people around me a part of the failure? And what could I learn? Not to cast blame, but to understand my allies and my enemies, to understand my practices and how they might be informed and improved. The why, the how, and the what next. My journey. What could I look back and see, learn from, and how would it carry me forward? She wanted me to know that this was my gift, that I could erase what had happened and still go forward on a path that I was in charge of. Not the failure, I was in charge of. Failure is necessary. And if you don't believe me, go home and Google the Museum of Failure. It's a real thing. And it chronicles people like Thomas Edison. You know, he said, I didn't fail. I found 10,000 ways that didn't work. And here, I wonder if you can come up with who these people are. She saw herself as a failure at this time. Jobless, divorced, penniless, with a dependent child. She suffered through bouts of depression, eventually signing up for welfare. Difficult time in her life. J.K. Rowling. How about this one? After graduating, he wandered unsure of himself and what to do with his life. He became an insurance salesman, going door to door, worked for the patent office, eventually being a part of the patent application process. Felt like a failure. Einstein. One more. Married early, husband was at war, divorced, tried to get promotions. At the age of 45, realized she couldn't quit her job, wrote a book that became the manifesto for her business. But all along, she thought she'd fail because the book didn't sell. Mary Kay. Beloved, failure forms a path. We look at our whys, we look at our hows, we look at our what nexts. We remember our erasers so that we erase and don't have to dwell in the thing that went wrong, but remember and take in the lesson. Failure forms a path. But in Barrington, we have a problem. What I do every day is sit in my office at Community Church, and a month does not go by when someone does not come by to tell me the story of something that feels like failure. And what I fight in this beautiful town in which we live is this. You're a pastor, you can't tell anybody, right? What I fight is that this failure isolates us, and we are so guilt-ridden and so ashamed that in the midst of our failure, we think we are meant to do it all on our own, and we will not reach out, we will not seek help, we will not talk to one another. And so you know what? We're doomed to try and lift those stones and build the path by ourselves, and we doom others to walk the same path, because we won't share what happened with us. Beloved, failure is inevitable. And it's good. Remember that lesson I asked you to think of? It's good. It forms us. It sends us on this path. But when we hold our stories alone and deny them, we doom others to be without the wisdom our paths have formed. We are called to remember the eraser. We're called to remember to say, I learned some fabulous things in the midst of the failure, and the failure does not mark me because I've erased it, but here's what I've learned. We're called to be there for one another. So I challenge you. I challenge you in this place where we live and where we thrive to have your own eraser. And tonight when you leave, you're going to get one. Looks like that. But the challenge and the reason you should take one is because you believe what my mother said. Zina, no failure forms you. You erase the act, remember the lesson, and form the path. Beloved, I want you to look failure in the face and say, failure, take your best shot. I've got my eraser. Thank you.